story I'd like to tell you. It's a long story, but for you idiots who don't want to listen, this story isn't for you, so fuck off. You see, I'm a simple college student, living alone in an apartment. I was very enthusiastic about the release of Heart Gold and Soul Silver in the States. I had purposefully locked myself out of all media and internet about it, aside for school purposes. That means no 4chan, no YouTube, no Bulbapedia, etc. As I was busy with the school year and being poor at the time, I wasn't able to buy Soul Silver on launch date. After my school year ended, I ordered Soul Silver on Amazon. Sorry, I'd rather be poor than a pirate. However, it would take a week for it to arrive. I decided that during that time, I'd replay my Crystal version on the Game Boy Color. However, I realized that long ago my mom threw it away because I told her that the save file went dead, and I was very upset about it then. She also threw away my Silver version, so all I have is my Game Boy Color. As such, I set out to find a used Silver version, as it's the only Pokemon game left that they have for the Game Boy Color. $10, fairly cheap despite it being GameStop. I went home and started it up for a nostalgia trip. However, that's where things started getting bizarre, and that's why you're hearing me talk about it. The Game Freak logo started up as normal, but it just froze there. I thought the cart was just errored or corrupt or something, so I turned it on and off. The same thing happened. I tried pressing A and start over and over, and all the buttons. Eventually, the logo vanished, and there was a black screen for about 5 seconds. Suddenly, rather than going to the usual menu screen, I was already in the game's previous save file, which was odd, as I was expecting all of these carts to have been wiped by the poor battery. Either way, I wasn't complaining, as I would have chosen the continue option anyway, to see what the previous guy did. First off, I checked his trainer profile. His name was left blank. He apparently didn't have much originality. I checked his profile, and apparently he had 999 hours and 59 seconds put into the game, with all 16 badges, 999,999 Pokédollars, and all 251 Pokemon on the Pokedex. Since he had Mew and Celebi logged in his Pokedex too, I'm guessing that he either used a Game Genie or was just a really hardcore Pokemon player. I immediately checked his Pokemon to see what kind of badass team he had. To my surprise, I saw 5 unknowns and a 6th Pokemon named Hurry. I'm thinking that this is some sort of cruel joke from the person who last played the game, but I decided to check all the profiles anyway. As expected, they were all different letters of unknown, all level 5. I was a bit shaky with my unknown alphabet at the time, but I identified the word spelled out to be leave. As for the 6th Pokemon, it turned out to be a Cyndaquil. Mind you, this is before there were individual Pokemon icons for each Pokemon. The Cyndaquil looked normal, but it was a level 5, with only 1 HP left and only 2 attacks, Leer and Flash. I don't know why they named it Hurry, but at the time I just disregarded it. The most eerie thing was that, despite my volume being all the way up, none of the Pokemon said their usual cries, just pure silence. Creeped out by the team, I closed it. I was standing in what appeared to be a room inside Bellsprout Tower. However, for some reason, there were no NPCs around. Even more eerie was that the pillar in the middle didn't move at all, as if just leaning on its side. There wasn't any music either, and there was no exit or ladder, or at least I thought there wasn't. I walked around for a few minutes, but couldn't seem to find a way out. This was certainly not a room I'd ever seen in the Bellsprout Tower before. I tried checking my items for an escape rope, but the bag was empty. There weren't even any wild Pokemon for me to battle. Finally, I managed to find a ladder, which turned out to be behind the pillar. The screen turned black, and music finally started playing. I had a sudden chill, as I recognized the melody as that creepy tune you hear when you listen to the radio at the Alph Ruins, where all the unknown are. I immediately realized that it wasn't a loading transition, but rather I was in a dark room and would need to use Flash. Before I took care of that, though, I immediately checked my Pokegear to change the radio to something more pleasant to listen to. But it turns out there were no radio, phone, or time cards in the gear. There was only a map card in which Gold, the unnamed trainer from earlier, was just walking amidst a sea of black. I recalled that the Cyndaquil I had Flash, so I turned off my Pokegear and made Cyndaquil use Flash. I didn't see any message saying, "Hurry has used Flash," or anything like that. The game just became lit, just like that, and I soon regretted it. The room was a chilling blood red, with a linear gray path headed south. The ladder I'd used to go up and down wasn't there at all. I had no choice but to head south. The screen became darker every 20 steps I went, until finally I made it to the end, at which there appears to be a sign. I read the sign, which said, "Turn back now." Suddenly, I was asked to answer yes or no, and I became confused since the game hadn't even asked me a question. I chose yes, as I didn't really know what it was asking, and the screen went black again, making a ladder climbed noise. The unknown radio music stopped, and in a few seconds was replaced with the not as creepy pokey flute music. I was in another dark room, but I held my breath and used Flash again. Suddenly the game said that Hurry has fainted, which is odd since there weren't any status conditions like poison on Cyndaquil as far as I recall, and I clearly wasn't in a battle. I checked my Pokemon quickly and noticed that he was suddenly no longer in my party. In fact, after a bit of investigating, none of my Pokemon from before were there. They had all been replaced with level 10 unknown. I did the same thing as I did before and spelled them all out, only to uncover the message, "He died." Severely creeped out, I closed the team. After that creepy change, the room was lit to reveal myself in a very small room that appeared to be only 4 squares big. The walls of that room were gray bricks, as if I was inside something hollowed out. Outside the room appears to be a bunch of graves, similar to the ones in Pokemon Red and Blue's Lavender Town. I walked around the small room and tried pressing A, but nothing happened. I'd already concluded by this point that this was clearly a hacked game that some sadistic fuck sold to GameStop to troll whoever bought it. However, my curiosity kept me going. I checked Gold's trainer profile again, only to find out that the Gold sprite was missing his arms. He also seemed to appear less smug, but more sad and empty in a way that I don't even know how to describe. For some reason, it also now said that he had 24 badges, which was clearly impossible given that there are only 2 regions in the game, Kanto and Johto. After a few minutes of aimless wandering, my character suddenly spun and did the escape rope animation for no reason. Instead of flying up like normal, though, my character spun downwards slowly, as if sinking into the ground. The screen cut to black, and the game's music stopped playing. After finally landing, the overworld sprite for Gold was colored differently. Instead of his usual red color, he appeared completely white, including his skin. It was as if he came straight from the colorless Game Boy games and had been placed into the colored background of the Game Boy Color. The only exception to this was that his eyes were red now, which sort of reminded me of Mother 3's hidden boss, if you know about it. I checked his profile again, and in addition to it being as white as his overworld sprite, he had also lost his legs and had what appeared to be bloody tears from his eyes. It also now said he had 32 badges, which disturbed me, as this change of number seems to represent something important. I also checked my Pokemon team, which now contained 5 unknown and a level 100 Celebi with no nickname. The unknown were all at level 15 and spelled out the word dying. I nervously checked on the Celebi's profile. It was a shiny Celebi, except there was only one half of its sprite there. 1 arm, 1 leg, and 1 eye. It had only 1 attack. Perish Song. The area I was in itself was the Sprout Tower, with the immobile pillar as before, except everything in the room was shaded red now. I walked north for what felt like forever. Eventually, I finally encountered some generic NPC characters. They were all lined up to the side, just facing the long, slanted pillar in the middle. They were also completely white, and nothing happened when I tried to speak to them. I kept on going north until eventually I noticed that the pillar appears completely chopped off, with a transparent red sprite in that spot. To clarify, this wasn't some random red-colored sprite. It was the Pokemon Trainer Red, who Ash Ketchum is based off of in the anime. I went up to Red, and without even pressing A, I was suddenly engaged and finally in a battle. Music starts playing, but it wasn't the battle theme. It was the unknown radio music again, but playing in reverse. Gold's battle back sprite matched the front one, with the bloody eyes, white skin, and lack of arms, while Red sprite was the same as before in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, except transparent and colorless. The text simply said, "wants to battle," as if he had no name, and both of us only had 1 Pokemon each, which was weird, as I could have sworn I had 6 with the unknowns. My shiny Celebi came out, conveniently with half a sprite for the back as well. The shiny noise and animation was different, and the sound it made sounded like multiple screech attacks being used consecutively. Red sent out a seemingly normal male Pikachu, except he was at an extremely high level of 255, and he looked very sad, with tears in his eyes. Rather than the usual battle menu appearing, I was only given the option to use the attacks. Since my Celebi only had 1, Perish Song, I chose that. Naturally, since Pikachu was at level 255 and is generally pretty fast, he went first. Pikachu used Curse, lowering his speed, increasing his other stats, and confusing me. I'm not even sure if Pikachu can use Curse. Celebi used Perish Song. In 3 turns, both Pokemon would get KO'd, not like I had a choice. At this point, it didn't even go back to the fight menu. The battle just continued without me. Throughout the whole scene, there was no battle animations whatsoever. Pikachu used Flail, which didn't do much damage despite his level and boost as his health was maxed. Celebi used Perish Song. Nothing happened as it was already in use. Pikachu used Frustration, which did a shit ton of damage, knocking Celebi down to less than 10 hit points. Celebi used Pain Split, which surprised me because Celebi didn't even have that attack in the first place. Now, Celebi and Pikachu each had about 150 hit points left. Pikachu used Mean Look. Not that it did anything, given I only had 1 Pokemon to use anyway, but I'm certain that Pikachu can't learn that move. Celebi used Perish Song, yet another pointless move. As expected, due to the effects of Perish Song, my Celebi fainted. Except in the text, it said, Celebi has died, and instead of the ordinary drop-off-the-screen animation, the Celebi back sprite just vanished. For some reason, the Pikachu was still up even with Perish Song in effect, and it didn't count as my loss. And then something happened that startled me. Pikachu used 1 more different attack beyond the 4 learned moves limit. Pikachu used Destiny Bond. Afterwards it said, Pikachu has died, with a slow fade-out animation. Apparently I was the winner, as the transparent red sprite showed up and said nothing at all. At this point, Transparent Red's head suddenly vanished, leaving nothing but his body behind, and I began to freak out. The battle then ended there, and the screen faded out, along with the music. I was back in the overworld with another change to the Gold sprite. He was now as transparent as Red's overworld sprite. I quickly checked Gold's profile, where this time the only thing remaining of him is his head, with transparent skin. The head had been zoomed in a bit, showing 2 black voids where his eyes should have been. His profile now stated that he had 40 badges. I then backed out and checked my Pokemon. They were all level 20 unknowns, which when spelled out, read no more. At this point in the game, I was at what I now know is next to the end. There was no music playing, but for some reason I still felt like something was there that could be heard, and it was making me nervous. I was now back in my room in Newbark Town. I thought that maybe I'd finally get to play the game properly, but who was I kidding? I knew that sick fuck of a hacker must have done something. I walked around my room to interact with things, slightly afraid of going down the stairs to see what awaited down there. Note that I said walked, but what I actually meant was floated. Just like those ghosts you see in Diamond and Pearl, Gold was not moving his transparent limbs at all as he walked. Instead, he just floated around, and the background moved with him. The radio, computer, and TV didn't work, so I had no choice but to go down the stairs. I ended up in the lower level of my house. Everything appears normal except Mom isn't home, so after failing to interact with anything in this room, I decided to go outside. To my surprise, the door leading outside at the south didn't work, and instead I just walked straight through it into a void. I continued moving south to see just what the fuck was going on. My house vanished from view as I headed south into the void. This whole thing was creeping me the hell out, as when I entered the void, the outline on Gold's transparent sprite turned white to contrast with the pitch black. Eventually, I reached a white area, and Gold's sprite finally turned black and transparent again. After a long trek south, I finally encountered something. It was Gold's normal sprite. Did this mean I could finally play the game as intended? Curious and a bit frightened, I talked to it. Gold's sprite said only, "Goodbye, forever," and then vanished. After that happened, a message popped up. 3 question marks used nightmare. I became alarmed. Attacks should have been impossible to do at that point. Gold did another escape rope animation, spinning slowly downwards like before. After the animation ended, I found myself back in that small, hollowed-out room, surrounded by graves. Or at least I say I was back there, as there was no sprite anymore to speak of. I tried to walk around, but I was unable to move. I didn't even hear that wall-bumping noise, indicating I'd run into something. Alarmed, I checked my trainer profile, which absolutely had no Gold sprite left, and it said I had 0 badges. All of the faces of the Johto gym leaders on the next page of the profile had been replaced with skulls. I checked my Pokemon, which were all level 25 unknown. Together, they spell out a phrase that I barely dared to read. I'm dead. As soon as I went back to the overworld, my room had suddenly been covered with the same blocks as the walls. To my horror, I suddenly figured out just what that little room was when the final text of the game appeared, reading R.I.P. The room was a grave, surrounded by other graves. Gold had already been dead since I started playing, and he died presumably a few years after he defeated Red. He was a young trainer who, despite his efforts in collecting so many badges and his desperate attempts at becoming a Pokemon Master, was still unable to avoid the inevitable fate of death, and his efforts were eventually forgotten by the next generation. The beloved Pokemon he worked so hard to raise had perished with him without a trace. This was the fate that befell his predecessor Red, and Gold had finally joined him. I was unable to escape from that text no matter how many buttons I pressed. I tried resetting the game, and the text remained. Eventually, I just decided to give up on that horrible nightmare altogether. After that experience, I will never look at the gimmick Pokemon Unknown the same way again. They say that only the first generation has folk tales and legends, but the second generation has shown me how unpleasant the truth can be. I eventually did get and enjoy Soul Silver immensely, but I still can't unthink what that rigged game told me. It even made me choose Totodile as my starter, just so I could not possibly encounter Cyndaquil in that game in any way. For now, I don't know what I was thinking, but I still kept the cartridge, which is locked away in my apartment somewhere. I was going to keep it as proof, but after the awful experience of playing that game, I'm starting to rethink my decision.